March 9th, 2015, and I'm speaking with Jean Atchley, and also we have Jackie Vajunik in the room. So we do that to start. Jean, tell me about where and when you were born.
I was born in 1923 out at the ranch, which is about 40 miles west of here, and it was our folks' homestead. I was born in a half dugout out there.
My goodness. And when did your family move on to the homestead, do you know?
Yeah, 1913, in October of 1913.
Okay, and what did they do on their homestead? Were they farming, ranching?
Well, they had to farm. The homestead, the Homestead Act was where they awarded the homesteaders 320 acres, but to get possession of that and get the title in their name, there were certain things they had to do. They had to move on to live on the acreage at least 6 months out of the year for so many years, and they had to build a dwelling. There wasn't any or very strict regulations about what the dwelling was, but they had to live on it. They also had to till at least, or break out and till at least 40 acres of the 320 acres. Mm-hmm. And that's what they did when they came out there. And
they moved to the homestead from Oklahoma?
Yeah, they moved from Oklahoma in a covered wagon. They had 3 children and was expecting the 4th one when they moved out there in 1913.
So how many brothers and sisters do you have in total?
Well, there was 5 boys and 2 girls. The one girl passed away before I was born, and now I have one sister is the only survival now. It's my sister. Mm-hmm. One brother, one just 2 years older than myself, was lost in World War II in the South Pacific in the Air Force, and then my other 3 brothers have all passed away. My last one passed away a year ago. He was 100 years old.
My goodness.
My sister lives in Albuquerque, and she's 98 years old.
Mm-hmm. So can you tell me what it was like to grow up on the homestead? What was your daily life like?
Well, it was. We were very fortunate. We was sure we were pretty poor, but everybody living out there was, so we weren't any different than most of the kids that grew up, and we had a lot of good times, and our family was large enough that we had a lot of pleasure within our family, and we done a lot of things. We attended school, of course, and had a lot of activities in school, and my folks, we went to every Saturday night there was a dance somewhere in the area in the schoolhouses, and we all went, and my folks went with us and took us, and they made sure that all of us behaved, and we had a nice childhood. We grew up and had a lot of pleasure. My folks, we had to work hard, but we played hard, and my folks participated right along with us.
Excellent. So what types of things did you help out with on the farm when you were growing up?
Well, we worked horses and mules, and as soon as we got old enough, which is I think I started driving a team when I can't remember how young I was, but I know I went to the field on a regular basis probably when I was about 11 years old and 12, and we drove the mules to different, cultivators and planters and so forth and so on. And then in the fall, well, we participated in the harvesting, and then later we expanded and had cattle and livestock, and we worked with the livestock and with cattle and hogs and chickens and so forth. And we had regular chores that each one of us were assigned that we had to perform every day, and it was our responsibility. So folks taught us responsibility, and no, we had a good childhood. I started to school over in Sophia, which was about 10. Schoolhouse was about 12 miles away, but the way we had to go to pick up the children, it was probably close to 20 miles away. And I started school when I was 5, and went to school out at Sophia till I was through the 11th grade, and then I came into Clayton. I started my senior year here in Clayton when I was 15, graduated when I was 16, so I had a good school. I didn't go to college because my older brother, just older than me, and my sister were both in college at the time, and it was quite a expense for my folks. They couldn't help much because they both of them more or less they worked to help themselves through school. But I was young enough that it didn't seem hard for me to lay out a couple of years to kind of help them get through before I started. And then the war came along and interrupted that. So.
So you were born right before the Dust Bowl, so you were probably a pretty young child. Can you tell me
I was in.
Yeah.
The Dust Bowl started in the 1930. 29 was a bumper year in the area, and I remember it. We had a big crop and everything, and then 1930 started the drought, and it lasted clear through that decade. We had a year or two that we had moisture. 1935 was a pretty good year, and we raised some crops. And 37 was a pretty good year, but all the rest of them were very, very dry. 1934, winter 34 and the spring of 35 was the worst part of it. It was really terrible. The dust, everything was blowing. The pastures, fields, everything was blowing. It just dust storm after dust storm. Going to school, my older brother John driving the school bus, and the school bus was just a pickup with a box on the back. But we'd get stuck a lot of times in what we call the blow sand, where it blew out, the sand had blew out on the roads, and every morning we'd have trouble or getting stuck or in the evening because about every day it seemed like there was a dust storm, and there where the schoolhouse was at Sophie, there was farmland on all sides of it, and so it was constantly and I can remember sitting and studying or reading a book, and every few seconds you'd have to brush the dust off of the book because it had so much dust on it you couldn't see the print. So
can you tell me a little bit more about how it affected your family? I mean, how did you make it through?
Well, we worked hard and sacrificed and done without, and we didn't have we had a very small home. We lived partly in the dugout. It was a half dugout, half of it below ground, half of it up. And then the folks, they moved a two-room house up there and set it in front of the dugout. So we had the kitchen and all upstairs, and then we used the dugout for sleeping quarters. That's after I was born. They used the dugout up until that time. It was their only dwelling was the dugout, and it was a half dugout, and then there was an upstairs where the eaves came down, and that was sleeping quarters. But like I say, everybody in the area, the farmers, they were all poor, and we weren't any worse off than most of them, and sometimes maybe a little better. As far back as I can remember, we always had an automobile, and every so often, every 4 or 5 years, we'd get a different one, a new one, and like I say, we had our livestock, and gradually the homesteaders started leaving, and my dad started expanding by leasing land that those that left, and leased their land, and he kept increasing his cattle herd. And when the drought it hit the worst, why just before it hit, he had close to 500 head of cattle. And the time it was over, we didn't. We had well, he saved back 50 head of 2-year-old heifers in '34, and when the spring came, we had 37 left. The rest of them had died with dust pneumonia. So it was more or less a start over for us after the drought, and but like I say, we lived as well as anybody, but certainly not better. And we always had plenty to eat. We raised our own meat, and had and mother always raised chickens. We had chickens, and we had our own milk and eggs, butter, and so forth. So I certainly we were never hungry. We always had plenty of good food, and we dressed as well as the average. Probably not any better, but certainly not any worse. So, and we all of us finished high school. My oldest brother was 16 years older than me, and he was out of high school before I started school. But we all finished school, and my sister was the only one that went to college. But and well, of my brother that was lost, but he in the war he went, but he didn't finish because he had to go to service. But
were you scared as a child when the dust blew? Were you scared?
No. The only time we were scared, I'm sure you have heard about that Black Sunday. Well, we were scared that time. It was on a Sunday, and I can remember that very well, in the spring of '35. And we had some company. There was some other neighbors there, and Dad and Mother usually, or lots of times, they would drive up to Grenville, which is 18 miles away, on a Sunday, because we didn't take a daily paper. Of course, we didn't have daily mail. It was only every 3 times a week. But Dad always loved to get the Sunday Denver Post. And if the weather was all right, lots of times they'd drive up to Grenville and get, when the mail train come through, and get the Denver Post. And they did that day, and of course, we were all playing around and having time, and we got noticing this black cloud coming up. And so we kept getting worse, and so we were all standing outside and watching it, and we saw Dad and Mother coming. We could see them coming about 3 miles away, and Dad was never a fast driver, but we could tell he was driving really faster than normal. So before they got there, some of us ran out and opened the barn door. We had a big barn with a driveway in it. Opened the driveway, the barn door, and when they got there, they drove right straight on into the barn. And then they come to the house. By the time they got to the house, that cloud was scary. It was just rolling, and it looked like big caves open up in it, and it was just coming in, and it was scary, really scary. But we stood there and watched it, and but when it first hit, there wasn't wind. There wasn't any wind. It just rolled in and it got dark. It was like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and it just turned dark. And when we turned to go into the house, we had to light a light. Of course, we didn't have electricity. We had kerosene lights. We had to light a light to see where to go. It was that dark. And then the wind started getting bad. And it came so sudden and so surprising. The livestock, usually the livestock and all detect a storm coming and they react to it. But the livestock didn't even react to this storm. Some of the kids that were there, that when they went home that night, later in the evening, some of Mother's chickens they saw down in the road where they'd hit them, and they just squatted down there. They didn't even go back to the chickens always went to the chicken house when it started getting dark, but they didn't go back. They just it surprised them too, and that was scary. But that was the only time that that I was really scared.
So it lasted all day.
That lasted all night, and into the next morning or the next day, and it quit the next day. But there was a lot of people that was real scared than that. There was people that thought the world was coming to an end, and that was it and all. But no, we did the regular dust storms. You get awfully aggravated at them and awfully depressed sometimes. I mean, I don't know as we as kids did, but I know the folks did. But I know I've seen my mother sweeping up and carrying the dust out of the house in a scoop shovel.
Wow.
It's that much. So.
Constant battle.
Yeah, it was.
So you said that your family did pretty well. Why do you think? Do you think your family ever thought about moving away? And
no, they've thought about it, always increasing their operation there, but no, they never thought about moving away.
So what do you think your parents knew that made them more successful when some other people were having trouble?
I think of the fact that they acquired livestock and kept trying to expand. Now my father didn't buy a lot of land. He leased it because I know he always, which was a mistake that he didn't realize till later. But he said, well, what was the use of buying it? You could lease it for 5 cents an acre, and the taxes on it was 3.5 cents. So it didn't make sense to own it. But But then when the land started increasing in value, we had a migration of people coming up from Texas and Oklahoma because the landed values had increased back there before they did out in our area. And some of them, a lot of them came in and bought up the land, and by the time the natives there realized that a lot of the land was gone. However, they probably couldn't have bought it anyway because they didn't have the money. It sold for $2 an acre, and you could, probably buy it for 10 cents an acre down. Mm-hmm. But if you didn't have the 10 cents, you still couldn't buy it. So. Yeah. And about all our people, my folks and all those surrounding folks, they were just making a living. They didn't. And then when back in the 32, when the banks failed, well, most of the banks were really tough about loaning money, and it was hard to get a loan. I mean, it was hard to borrow money, mm-hmm. especially for those little farmers and homesteaders, because they didn't have anything to put up but their land, and most of it was already mortgaged, and it wasn't, like I say, it wasn't very valuable anyway. So the banks, I was too young to remember a lot about the Roosevelt administration, but when he first came in, but I can remember my folks talking about it. And I know my dad, I can remember my dad saying that he went into the bank to try to borrow some money, and the banker said, "We're not loaning any money to anybody until the blankety blank government gets out of it." Pretty much what you hear today. But and of course the government didn't get out of it. They stayed involved in it up to this time. So. Yeah.
So it sounds like maybe during the 30s people moved away, and then there was people came.
Yes, they moved away in the early 30s during the drought, and a lot of them just left. I mean, they just got up and left because just went to California. Most of them went to California because they couldn't, with the drought and the dust, they couldn't raise anything, and they had to make a living, and they left. A lot of them left then, and then when the war came along, another big draft of them left to go to California to work in the factories and so forth. So, mm-hmm. And like I say, in the meantime, there was people coming in from Oklahoma and Texas and Arkansas that found the land here cheaper and I don't know, less crowded than it was back there. So mm-hmm. There was kind of a double movement, yes. Yeah. So.
More questions about the Dust Bowl?
Do you have any more stories about the Dust Bowl you'd want to share with us?
I didn't hear
any more stories about the Dust Bowl
Yeah.
you'd want to share with us that you can remember?
Any more stories about the Dust Bowl that you can remember that you'd like to share?
Oh, like I say, no, the biggest thing I remember is like going to school, fighting the dust in the roads. I mean, the sand in the roads, mm-hmm. And there at the school, most of the time a lot of the time we couldn't play outside during the recess and all because it was the dust was so bad. Mm-hmm. And
was there still grass for the cattle?
And there was no grass. I mean, everything blew.
Everything.
Even where the pastures, it blew, and like around the schoolhouse, there was big drifts of sand, blow sand, like when it snows, it's like the snow drifts, and even out around our house, out of home at the ranch. I remember we played in it because there was a drift about this high all around the south side of the house where it just drifted up there, and it just drifted up like snow, and there was no grass anywhere. In 34, there was no grass. That's why we had to sell all our cattle, and in fact like I say, my father kept 50 head of 2-year-old heifers, but the rest of them they sold a lot of them to the government, and they shot them. They came in and shot them, and that sounds bad today, and it was bad, but there wasn't anywhere to go with them. There was no market because nobody. The Depression. The drought came at the same time as the Depression, and the Depression wouldn't have hurt us in the area, in the rural areas, if it hadn't been for the drought, because we raised the food and everything. But the Depression hit the cities, so they had no money to buy products, so there was no market for the cattle. They had more cattle and beef and stuff that they couldn't sell because people had no money back in the cities and all.
Do you think that was hard on your dad to sell his herd off?
Oh, it like killed him. I mean, he aged a lot of years there real quick because it's hard on him because he built that herd from when they came out there in a covered wagon. I think they had 3 cows and 6 horses or whatever it was, just he built that herd and from nothing, and it was real hard. It was hard on all of us because we worked with them, and even as young as I was, I couldn't. I didn't even want to drive by. They'd drive the older cows and the ones that they shot and all, but they'd drive them down in a fence corner and hold them in that fence corner, and they cut horseback, and then the guys would just shoot them. And several years before, I even wanted to drive by down there where they shot the cows. Because you thought about it every time you went by there.
Sure.
But like I say, it was probably a reasonable program to shoot them because the government paid us $8 a head for the cows and I think $4 a calf, and there wasn't any other market. So
were the cows in good shape? Or were the cows affected by the drought? I mean, were they skinny and malnourished? Or?
Well, they were getting poor all the time because there wasn't any grass, and you couldn't afford to buy feed, and there wasn't any feed to buy anyway. The few 50 head that we kept, we hauled hay in from Colorado all winter. I mean, truckloads of hay, and it was expensive. And then the cattle didn't, they got poor because you couldn't feed them as much as they'd like. You just kind of tried to keep them alive. And then the dust pneumonia, they get that dust pneumonia. They get down, you couldn't save them, but.
So you said your dad, it was hard on your family to lose the cows. How about your mother? How did...
it affected mother too. Oh yes, very hard on her mother because the dust in the house, and of course our house was not very tight anyway, and it was always full of dust, and in the storms, she'd wet sheets and hang them up over the windows, all to keep the dust from coming in as much as she could, or keep it from getting dusty.
Well,
And yeah, and you know, even in their cooking and all, they had to be so careful all the time about the dust. And yeah, it was really hard on all of them. It was hard on everybody, but the older folks, my dad and mother, it was really hard on them.
Did any of you get sick? Because I know, did any of you get sick? Because lots of kids got
Not
sick.
that I remember from the dust. I mean, we had our, along about that time, we had the regular, you know, like the measles and chicken pox and stuff. But I don't recall any of us getting sick just from the dust.
can you tell me about your water well? What did you use? Where did you draw water from?
Well, we didn't have a well at the house. There was a well about a half a mile away, and we hauled water from there. We had barrels, and like a team of mules in a wagon. We'd go down there and load up them barrels and haul it home. And Mother could make a gallon of water go further than anybody, because we always hated to haul water, and it was a chore that, so she conserved water as much as she could, and then of course if it rained or anything, they caught some water off the roof. But we had a cistern. Dad dug a cistern, but that held water. They haul water in had a big tank they hauled and filled that cistern up, but we didn't use the cistern any after I was old enough to remember. They did some before that, but the well, my grandparents had they homesteaded a mile west of us, and when they drilled their well, they had like 90 feet of malapi. And that malapi was like almost like granite. It was so hard to drill, and it cost so much to drill it. I think you know, like if they're charging $1 a foot for dirt, they charge $10 a foot for malapi. Well, Dad was so afraid that we had so much malapi that we couldn't afford to drill. So we didn't have a well there until 1939, and finally we, of course, we owned those. He bought out his relatives, and he owned the well on my granddad's place, and the one that's just a half mile west of it, they owned the land and owned the wells, but we just hauled water from there. But then in '39 we drilled, and we didn't hit any malapi.
All those years.
Yeah, all those years.
Could have had a well.
He would have drilled, but
Did the drought affect the wells? I mean, was there a lack of rain? Were you always able to draw water through the?
yeah, enough to drink, but nothing. There wasn't strong enough water like for irrigation, like down south of here or over in the Panhandle. No, there wasn't that strong of water. It's enough to pack for the livestock and all. And now out there we've got from my granddad's well down there, we piped that water about 4 or 5 miles up into the pasture, where we because that's up in the hills, like Don Carlos Hills, when we know there's malapi up there. And in fact, I had a well drilled up there and it was very, very expensive. So we piped some of that water up there. Since we have electricity, you can do that. Of course, back in those days, where you didn't have electricity, where you could move that water around.
How long did it take to build back the herd? I mean, you said you started from scratch again.
Well, we didn't, and never did build it back. completely. In fact, we took cattle to pasture when it started raining and the seasons kind of came back. We took cattle to pasture because there was these ranchers around that came in and brought cattle in from Panhandle and all that would pay so much for the season. And so we didn't build a cow herd back until probably quit taking pasture cattle about just a year or two before my dad passed away, which is he died in 1947. So and then we had the cattle herd in but we never did build it back as big as it was, because I could say a lot of that land that we leased sold out from under us, and we didn't have a near as big a ranch. Since after my dad passed away later, I bought quite a bit of land, and we have a ranch that's bigger than when he was alive. I did, but.
So tell me about that. You said you graduated when you were 16, and you stayed on and helped your dad.
Yeah.
And then what? Well, then what happened in your life?
Well, I went to the service in 1942. I enlisted in the service, and first I joined the Signal Corps. I went to down to Las Vegas to the university there in Las Vegas. We studied radio, and there for about I think I enlisted I think in September, or I went down there in September, and they I was sworn into the service in October, and I stayed down there till and went to those classes until January, and then I went to El Paso, and then went on out to Sacramento to basic training, and I went to basic training out there, and then I was shipped to Chicago, and they sent us to school there, what they call Coin Electric School, and we studied more radio and radar and stuff, and learned the Morse code and all that to be radio operators.
So you were a radio operator.
Well, I never did serve as one. I was trained for one, and we spent about 5 months there, and then they shipped us to New Orleans, and we weren't doing anything here at New Orleans, only just doing our regular training. I mean, actually we just kind of sat around waiting for assignment, and a couple of guys said, well, we're going to go take the test to see if we can get into aerial gunners with they're taking aerial gunners in the Air Force. And I said, well, I think I'll go with you. So I went with them, and I got over there and to take the test. And they said, well, why do you want to be an aerial gunner if you can pass the physical and the mental? If you can pass their mental tests are pretty stiff, but if you can pass them, you can go in for pilot training. I said, now what they do, before that you had to have 2 years of college before you could go into flight training. But they have set up a new program, what they call CTD, College Training Detachment, where they'll send you to college for 5 months if you can pass the test. So I said, well, I'll just take that test. And I did, and I done okay on it. And so they shipped us to Biloxi, Mississippi, and we done a bunch more testing there. And then they sent me to University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. And I spent 5 months there in what they call college training detachment. And it was very good. They gave us 2 years of college in 5 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
And actually we took the same examinations that 2-year college students took. Plus they'd send in some government tests that it was even tougher. But they said, you know, if you can make it, fine. If you can't, well, that's okay too. You can go back, send us back to doing whatever you was doing before. So, but we done it, and it's every once in a while somebody wash out. But I'd been out of college, out of high school for 3 or 4 years, but 4 or 5 years, but it was really easy to learn because you had an incentive, you know. It wasn't just somebody telling you to get the lessons. You got it because you knew if you didn't get it, if you didn't make it, you was going to go back to doing something else, and you wanted to be there
Right.
in the cadets. So.
Did you ever get to fly?
Well, that's some more of the story.
Okay.
We took 5 months there, and then we went to San Antonio for the Aviation Cadet Center there, and actually you learn ground school and all that stuff there, and I was there for I think 9 and 11. 12 weeks maybe, I don't know. And then I shipped to, then they did, when you went there, you didn't know whether you was going to be in bombardier or navigator or pilot training. And all the time you was there, you studied for all of it. But when you left there, they decided which way you went. So when I left there, I went to pilot training in San Angelo, Texas. And I was in pilot training at San Angelo, and unfortunately I crashed an airplane there, and I survived it and didn't get hurt, but I thought I was going to get hurt, and I tore the airplane up pretty bad. And this sounds like an excuse, but it's really not. But the government had decided they would, in their planning, they planned for so many thousand air crews to defeat the German Luftwaffe. Well, I was in the class of 45C, which would have been a third class in 45. Well, about the time we got to San Angelo, the Luftwaffe was done. They were folded up. They were completely defeated. So they had thousands of us in training that they knew that they weren't going to need us all.
Yep.
So what they did, they just tightened the screws up a little tighter. And in fact, they tightened them down so tight that, if you look crosswise, well, you were out.
Right.
And when I crashed that airplane, my instructor said, he said, if you'd have been 2 or 3 classes ahead, he said, we'd had no problem. But he said, I've got to put you up for a test flight because that's the rules. I got to do it.
Yeah.
And he said, you won't pass that test flight because nobody passed it. And sure enough, I didn't pass it.
Yeah.
So then I went back to St. Louis or actually it was field their love for further flight training for our radio operator.
Oh.
So that's and I trained there for 5 or 6 months, and then I was assigned to B-29 school at Lincoln, Nebraska. But I never saw a B-29. We didn't even know what they were. They had them, but we didn't know what they were. And then actually I was on a flight from I got a delay en route from St. Louis to Lincoln, and when I got off the plane at Denver, changed planes at Denver. I got off the plane at Denver. Well, I found out about them dropping the atomic bomb.
Wow.
And of course, everybody, I was the only serviceman on the plane, and everybody has asked me about it. I didn't know more about it than I did, but anyway. And then I was, of course, we were discharged by your point system, and I didn't have a lot of points because I had quite a lot of time in, but I didn't have any combat or anything. So I went to the station at Lincoln for a while and we trained there a while. And then, of course, the war was over. The training was, we just flew enough to get our time in. And then we went to Reno, Nevada. And I fought that terrible battle for about 4 or 5 months. Oh, it was a ball.
So was it? You came from this rural area as a child. Was traveling? Did you enjoy going to all those different places?
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed my service time, and I made the most of it. I tried to make the most of it. I met a lot of wonderful people during my time in the service. It's just like it was there at St. Louis. Actually, the field, our base was over in Illinois, across the river, and you get, there's thousands of us there, and like it was at every base. And the guys you get to pass, get time off, they'd head for town. Well, they'd get off the bus, first place to get off the bus, and there was always bars, and guys just make for those bars. Well, hell, it's all it was. It's almost like being back on the base because it was all the servicemen. And of course a few women, but not very many. But I always made it a habit of going on out into the other end of the city and meeting people or
exploring.
Lots of times I'd go to church or something, and I wasn't that big in church, but I'd go and I'd meet people and get invited to their house for dinner, or I made some of the nicer places and met some nice girls. I went with a lot of lovely girls all over the country, really, and went to, like I always I grew up as a kid. We always grew up as dancing. We liked to dance, and like I said earlier, my folks always took us to dances. And we all learned to dance, and we loved to dance, and I could take a girl to a nice place like, I like in Chicago to Aragon or the Trianon ballrooms and the Black Hawk restaurant and places like that, and I just had a good time.
Yeah.
And yes, I never suffered in the service. I had a good time.
Oh.
Did you know that you always wanted to come back home?
Oh yes. I always wanted to come back home, and
Did you come back home after you were discharged, or?
No, I came back as soon as I was discharged. Now, I didn't want to. I mean, I had a chance of when I got when the war was over. We sold the United States sold a lot of airplanes to neutrals like to Sweden and Switzerland places, and those of us like us that you had a chance if you'd sign up for an extra year, they'd put you on to delivering some of those airplanes, and you could deliver. like you deliver one to Sweden, or they'd send you back first class, and you'd have so long to get back, and you could draw per diem. And another thing, the guys, when they'd fill their parachute bags full of cigarettes and ballpoint pens, and they made good money. And I wanted to do that so bad, but my father was in real bad health, and he needed me here, and they had suffered. He and Mother had suffered a lot when they lost my brother, and I knew that I had to come home as quick as I could. So I really wanted to do that bad, but I had to turn it down.
And what year was that? When did you come back?
I come back in 46.
46.
February of 46, yeah, when I got home. And my dad, he just lived till 57, so, I mean 47. 47, he just lived.
Another year.
Yeah, another year. And
So did you take over the family operation when you passed?
Yes, I started to took it over as soon as I got back and started, and I ran it, took care of it for my mother, and she stayed out there at the ranch, and I married. I met and married my first wife, and she was a neighbor girl. I mean, her folks lived about 10 miles from us, and of course she was just a little girl when I went to the service. And she was 7 years younger than me, and I married her, and we had 3 girls, and then she contacted MS, and she was an invalid, you might say, for 19 years in a wheelchair.
That must have been challenging. So you came back. A lot of people say there was another dry period in the 50s.
Yeah.
So did you come back to that?
Yeah, we had a dry period in the 50s, but things were more mobile and had different choices. We moved our cattle all out in the 50s, but we went to Kansas in the Flint Hills and leased grass up there, and we moved them up there, and then we brought them back. So we didn't liquidate. We sold down, but we didn't liquidate. But we shipped them all up there, and went up there and took care of them and stuff. And we didn't move up there, but we went back and forth and took care of them.
Yeah.
We did that for a couple of 3 years until we started getting rain again.
And did that work well? Was that good? I mean.
Yeah, it was expensive,
Yeah.
but it cost a lot of money to put them on a train and move them up there and move them back, but and the leasing grass, but at least we saved our herd,
So at that time, were you pretty much doing only ranching, or was there still farming going on, or?
Yeah, no, I still farmed. We when we farmed pretty much. Mostly what we farmed was feed for the livestock. We raised sorghums and all for the livestock, and we raised a few pinto beans for money crop, but not a lot. And I farmed, and then they come in with the government program to forget what they call it, but the government leased the land, and if you took it out of production. I had a name for it. Anyway, put most of the farmland in that, so that's when I quit farming.
You stayed and ran the ranch your whole life, so when did you, tell me more about that.
Well, I started after, I think it was in '62, I started partnering with a boy from Denver, Jewish man. He was a member of a big cattle family in Denver, and he had moved. He was only in his early 20s, and he'd moved to Amarillo. Had a family. Moved to Amarillo and opened up a cattle business there. And he had some cattle for sale that I went and looked at, and we decided that I'd just partner on them, and I'd run them on my ranch, and that started a partnership. And I worked with them, and then we stayed partnered for 20 years. He acquired some land over at Tucumcari. He put some cattle out on pasture over there, and he advanced the money, and finally he had to take a second mortgage on the place, and finally had to take it over, paid off the bank, and so we took it. We built a feedlot there too, because they were in the feeding business. They were big cattle feeders in Colorado, Brush, Colorado, and so we built a feedlot there and fed cattle. And I didn't ever move down there, but I worked back and forth down there with him, and we worked and I run cattle on the ranch, and I leased other additional land, and then he and I, like I say, we run quite a few cattle together, and then we ran them on wheat pasture, and I took care of cattle for the Weisbart company, several 2 or 3 different winters. I had cattle on wheat all over the Panhandle. I had as high as 20,000 cattle under that I was responsible for, that I took care of.
Wow.
Of course, I had 5 or 6 guys working for me, but and then we bought a place in Colorado in the valley up there at Alamosa, and actually the Weisbarts. Well, I was a partner in it, and we had bought a farm and built a feedlot up there, and we had a cattle feedlot, and eventually we had a swine operation and a fish operation.
Wow.
I didn't participate much in the fish operation, but they have hot water in the valley up there. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but they drill down and drill the wells, and they get down 1,000 foot or so where that water comes up pretty warm, and it made it conducive to raise the catfish. And so we put in a catfish deal and to channel cat, and we were getting along with them pretty good. But the catfish, we were raising them in big tanks, and they take a lot of oxygen because they're big mouth and all, and they take a lot of oxygen. So we had to impregnate that water with liquid oxygen, which is pretty expensive. Plus the fact that you had to force it, that oxygen. And then we had a power outage there one day, and it lasted several hours, and it knocked our oxygen off, and we lost all of our fish. We lost about $50,000 worth of fish.
Wow.
A little more than that, really. But anyway, that we didn't go back with the catfish. We came back with tilapia.
Oh, yes.
Because the tilapia didn't require near as much oxygen. And so we started raising tilapia. We introduced the tilapia to that area. And actually we hired a I forget, I can't call it the title of him, but anyway, he was a fishman out of the University of Louisiana or somewhere down there that come up there to help us run that fish operation.
That's
And,
really unique.
It's still operating. I mean, we're not at the end of it anymore. We got out of it, and Wise Bart, my partners I was with, they out of it. But my son-in-law is back up there in the valley, and in fact, he teaches up there in the college. And in fact, he's a dean up there in the college. And
Excellent.
they wanted him. Somebody told him that they wanted to show him the fish operation when he first went up there. And he went out there and he said, I showed him all around. And he finally said, yeah. I said, my father-in-law started to help start this deal.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they, like I say, they still operate it. But we had when we first put it in, we were selling those fish. We were calling them Rocky Mountain perch, and that was kind of a no-no for the government stopped us from.
They didn't like that.
Yeah, because people didn't ever heard of it. That area at least had never heard of tilapia.
Yeah.
But our best market at that time, and I don't know if it's still imagined, but to some extent, but at that time our best market was in the Bay Area, San Francisco, up in there is where we sent most of them.
How interesting.
Wow.
Back to the ocean.
Yeah.
So none of it.
Because people go out there to eat fish, and so we sent the fish out to them.
It sounds like you were really entrepreneurial, so you had a lot of different ways to do business.
Well,
Putting them on
I've been
feedlots.
fortunate, very fortunate.
Yeah.
And then after we run feedlots at Hereford, Texas, and at Perryton, and finally this Wise Barts, their family kind of had a blow up and a separation, and I left them, but the banker here had a feedlot out here, and his son had started to build and had got killed in a car wreck here. So he found out that our deal was kind of blowing up. So he asked me to come back here and run this feedlot, which I did. I came back here and took it over and ran it for.
About when was that?
That was in '82, and I run it till 1990, and he got in trouble with his bank, and he kept pulling money out of there, out of that feedlot, and he pulled so much money out of there, about $800,000, and it
Fell through.
Yeah, it broke it, and then he committed suicide, and his heirs put it into bankruptcy. So when it went into bankruptcy, my brother and I went and bought it. We bought it from the bankruptcy court, and then he and I operated it for. We bought it in 1990, and we operated it till 07, I guess. And we sold it. We sold some stock in it to a couple other, one fellow from Colorado and one from a local farmer here, and in 07, I think it was. Well, he and I got crossways, and he sued me. And he claimed that I stole a lot of money from him and all that stuff, and
That's unfortunate.
which, of course, it wasn't true. We had 3 audits that showed that I hadn't taken anything. I took a lot of money, but what I was doing, I was buying the cattle for the feedlot, and I had been in the commission business, buying and selling cattle back ever since I took over the ranch. So I was buying the cattle and then charging the commission, but I buying all the cattle for the feedlot, but I was charging commission.
Yeah.
But I had all the paperwork and everything. Anyway, that lawsuit hung on for 8 years, and finally, never come to trial. They couldn't get it. It didn't come to trial. It just finally, about a little less than a year ago now, it
Was finally resolved.
They just,
Yeah.
my attorneys and his attorneys, and they said that they'd walk away if we'd walk away. So we did. That's what we did. We walked away.
Yeah.
But it cost me a lot of money in attorneys.
You have a lot of experience with feedlots, so can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Some of the farmers and ranchers that I talked to in this most current drought, some of them left or sent their cows to the feedlot because they couldn't graze on their own land. So do you think these dry times, how do they affect the feedlot business? I mean, do feedlots hurt, or is there, in this example that I'm thinking of, sometimes it seemed to increase maybe feedlot business?
Well, no, the feedlot business is a separate business altogether.
Okay.
Feedlot, well, you've got about 3 different entities, you might say. You've got the cow and calf producer. That's a man that runs the cows and raises the calves. And then lots of times, then you've got what you call the yearling operator, which most all of this country is yearling operated, because it's good, strong grass, and the people from there again from the Panhandle and around here, they buy these yearlings and they put them out on the grass for the summer, and you pay so much for your summer pasture, and then you sell them off of the grass, and that they go to the feedlot, and the feedlot business is a separate business. I mean, you put them in there and you buy the feed and you process the feed, and you make them fat, and then you sell them to the packer.
To the packer.
And it's the feedlot business is it's an intricate business, I would say. Just like I had a nutritionist. I hired a nutritionist. In fact, he taught at the Oklahoma State.
Oh, excellent.
He either taught there or finished there. I see. No, he graduated there and he taught in Texas A&M. But anyway, that was my highest priced employee. I paid him a couple of $1,000s a month, and he'd spend maybe 1 day on a feedlot a month, maybe a day and a half on the feedlot. But he programmed all our rations, told us exactly what to feed. And everything's weighed. We had scales on our trucks and scales on our mixer box. Every ingredient was weighed, and we fed exactly the way we were told to.
Yep.
You do that to get maximum performance, of course.
Excellent.
And so, and then you deal with the packers. There's 4 packers, and major packers in the United States, and you sold your cattle to them, and that trial is marketing those cattle. So the feedlot business is quite different.
Separate. So, was there a time in Union County when there were more cow-calf operations than yearling operations?
Oh
or-
yes, yeah. Back before the Dust Bowl, everybody had a few cows, and it was after the Dust Bowl that it turned into a yearling operation, and there's still cows, and here just last go around, you might say the last few years it's been so dry, and the cows have all sold off again. There's just not hardly any cows, but that's all true all over the United States. You see, we're at the lowest cow level in the United States since in the 1950s, where the numbers are lower than they've ever been. That's why your beef is so high.
So I had the opportunity to meet your daughter Leanne, and she seems to really love the ranching lifestyle, and she helps her husband along. And so, can you tell me a little bit about raising your 3 girls, and did you involve them?
Oh yes, my girls. It's the best part of my life, raising those girls, and like I say, the girls. Durga's the oldest, and she was born in '50, and Janelle was born in '52. By the way, Janelle, I named her after one of my old girlfriends because I liked the name. In '62, their mother got, when she came down with the MS, Leanne was only 8 years old, and Durga was 12. So they had to grow up fast, and they did grow up fast. And I had housekeepers, hard housekeepers, but it was a trial because it was hard to keep domestic help out there on the ranch. Some of them would last several months, and some of them would last a few days. I had a hard time keeping help because like for that reason, and I've tried to get. I was in touch with all the employment deals from Clovis to Raton and everywhere, but I tried to get when the Vietnam deal. I tried to get that, but I could, you know, it was tough. But we had some good help, and my mother, she lived right there. I built a house in her yard, more or less. And she helped a lot with the girls, helped train them and all, but they learned to cook early, and they're all 3 excellent cooks today, and housekeepers, and they were good help on the ranch. They took them, they were good on horseback, and they were with me on horseback a lot, real lot. I mean, I know we did a lot of work together, and like they were just little. I remember one time I had this boy working for me that had worked up on that big ranch up there by Maxwell, and he just didn't work for a little while. And I got in a bunch of cattle, and I said, tomorrow we're going to go down there and gather those cattle, throw them in the fence corner, and I'm going to sort them for size because I wanted them different pastures. And so the next day, morning, we all saddled up, and the girls and he and I, we went down there. We threw the 400 or 500 cattle in the fence corner, and I started to sort them and sorted them out. I had the girls holding them, and the girls and him holding them, and I sorted them. And we got through that evening, and he said, "You know, when you told me last night we was going to throw those cattle in the fence corner and sort them," and he said, "I thought, well, who is going to get the help?" And he said, you didn't say anything about any help. And he said, when we started out this morning, he said, I thought, how in the hell are we going to do that with these 3 kids? And he said, I found out. He said, when I worked up there at that on Vallejo, he said we had about 15 cowboys, and we'd go to do something. Our kids, we'd throw them in a fence corner, and he said that all the cowboys were whipping and riding and spurring, and he said the horse would be wet, all their horses be wet, sweating a little bit. He said, old Goody Knight, which was the foreman, he said he'd ride into the herd and lope and come out and run, and he said, you better turn them back, because he said they'd run them over you. And he said, I never did see one of the girls of their horses sweat. And he said, we didn't have any wrecks, and he said, I thought it would be a wreck from the beginning.
Right.
But he
That's
said,
a great story.
well, they watched me, and I give hand signals, trying to move over that way or move that way, and I taught them how to do things, and they were good cowboys. They were good cowboys.
Yeah.
They I almost got all of them hurt a few times. In fact, I had Durga bucked off them before she was ever started school. But they were good help, really good help.
Are there lessons from the Dust Bowl or your parents that you taught your girls?
What's that, dear?
Lessons or from the Dust Bowl that you taught your girls, or?
Well, just lessons through life, I think.
Yeah.
Partly the Dust Bowl, but thankfully, the Dust Bowl was over by the time they came along, and we were having good years out there. But
So we're interested in how things change over time. So how is their childhood different than your childhood? Or
well, a lot of difference in the fact that we had when they we had indoor plumbing and electricity, and it's quite a lot different than ours growing up.
Yeah.
And they our transportation wasn't a lot different, except it was a lot more modern, and we came to town a lot more, and of course, when the folks first moved out there, they just, they did until they got automobiles. They didn't. The only way they had to go was in the buggy or the wagon. But when the Model T come along, it was quite a trip for them to come to Clayton. I'll put it that way.
Yep.
They didn't come very often.
Yep.
And of course, the time I got in high school, it was pretty common to come. But my girls, they went to school out there at Sophie until I think Durga came in here when, I don't know, I think 8th grade, but Leanne saw probably about the 5th grade when she come in here. And they went to school here, and they done well in school. They done real well. They was Janelle and Durga, I think they were on several different organizations, and Leanne too. Leanne she was the first girl that took FFA here in Clayton. She was in the first class that took. I was in the first class that had FFA here in Clayton. And then she was in the first girl.
That's a great
That's
story.
great.
Oh yeah, and they done real well, and they were in the honor society, and they done real well.
What other ways has ranching and farming changed over time? From when you started to what it looks like now. What do you think are the the biggest differences?
The differences?
Yeah, how's it changed?
Well, the biggest difference now is most of your land here, ranch land here, I'd say probably 2/3 of the ranch land in Union County is owned by absentee owners. And that makes it a lot different. And
are they leasing their land out to ranchers, or
what's that?
What happens on that land? Are they leasing it, do you think?
Well, they run cattle on it, or they lease it out, or they do different things. But there's 2 or 3 big operators that own lots of land here. A couple of people that own land close into San Antonio. And when I suspect when it spread out, they sold that land, sold for lots of money, and they've owned a lot of land here. There's 2 or 3 outfits like that.
Yeah.
But
how about the community?
well, there's not, it's like the communities like Sophia. We used to have a lot of activities out there, and we had a baseball team out there, and after the war we had a basketball team, and we had there was a group of us that got together and had a basketball team. We played what they call AAU ball, amateur athletic, and like I say, the baseball. But now there's nothing, no community activities out there at all.
Yeah. What else was in Sophia? Was there stores or?
No, there was one store.
One store.
There was one store there then. There's none there now. And they built a new schoolhouse there when I didn't get to go in. And they built it the year after I left out there, after I came in here. But WPA, they built a big, nice schoolhouse and gymnasium. But it's all vacant now. And I don't know what, I've heard that they have some, I don't know if it's a church or something. It has some wayward boys staying there, but I don't know. Priest or who I don't even know who's operating it.
Yeah.
But there's not hardly any. Durga and Dees are the my son, daughter and son-in-law. They're the only ones out there.
Yeah.
And they used to be several big families. There was the Dillingers had 10 kids. The Depews had 12 kids. Stonebrings had 14 kids.
My goodness.
Wow.
And the Coveys had 10 kids. Well, it take a bunch of them, the Bryants, that made a big school pretty quick. And we had we had 5 teachers and 5 or 6, I think. Maybe part of the time we had 6 teachers. Big school and all, and a lot of things going on out there, but nothing no more. All a big ranch owns all that country, and they're the only ones out there.
And are they ranching on your
They're living
original
on the
homestead?
homestead where the folks homesteaded.
Outstanding.
I moved when Beverly and I got married. I moved my grandfather's house up there, and it was just a little 24 by 24 house, and I built onto it, and then that was in 49, and then in 59 I built on it again, and that's where they live. And then my mother's house, we built her house there in 48, but we tore it down about 7 or 8 years ago because it was right there in the same yard, but it was hard. It was a nice house, but it's hard to keep up. It's hard to keep one house up instead of 2, and there was skunks getting under it and stuff, so we tore it down. dug a hole and buried it. But the decent they're gonna live in what was my house out there.
Mm-hmm. So, are there any other stories that you'd like to share with us today? Or-
Well, I probably think of someone when you leave, but I can't think of
How about, do you have any lessons for the next generation here in Union County, or for your grandkids, or
Well,
your great
I have 8 grandchildren and 15 great grandchildren.
Wow.
And my prayer is that they just grow up to be good citizens. That's all I can ask for. And hopefully none of them have it getting any trouble or anything. But I'm sure that they won't all be ranchers. But just whatever their endeavor is, I hope they're successful in it. But some of them I hope stay on the land. I'm kind of sad in a way that when I'm gone, there won't be any Atchleys left here. Now there's some in Albuquerque, but not any here.
with the last name? Yeah, because you
Yes.
had 3 girls.
Yeah, 3 girls, and I don't have any namesakes. I mean, I don't any Atchley name left here. That's going to be sad in a way because, like I say, they homesteaded out there, and but it's nothing I can do about that now.
Yeah, it's a
But,
little late.
Yeah, yeah, they. But no, I don't know what'll happen. I don't see a lot of changes now. You know that down in where Barry's farm is, and my brother's farm down there that Chad's on. That water's all over the panhandle, is depleting, and so there'll be some changes there. I don't know. Go back to dry land or dry land farming, and people move away. I keep thinking that perhaps they will. Some engineering deal will come along to pipe some of that water from the big rivers in the east back down here. You know, Missouri and Mississippi. It sounds inconceivable, but if they can pipe oil and gas everywhere, I don't know why they can't pipe water. And the land is here. The land's highly productive if it gets water, and so maybe that'll happen in the future. I don't know. We have a ever increasing population to feed. We're going to have to feed them from something somewhere. So it seems like a far-fetched idea, but it wouldn't surprise me that sometime in the next 30 years
To get to doing that.
they pipe water back in here. 50 years, I don't know.
Has the weather changed then? I mean, I know we're in a dry period now, but do you think over the course of your life
No, I don't.
weather's
I don't believe in the
Yeah.
weather changing. I don't
No.
believe in this warming deal. I think that's all a farce.
Yeah.
It's just somebody for some guys to make some money off of. And I may be wrong. I've been wrong before. And
Yeah.
maybe I'm not smart enough to see the scientific end of it, but I don't believe in it.
Yeah. I didn't know because you were talking about the water going dry. So do you think it's because they're pulling it out of the ground?
Yeah, they
faster?
pulled it all out.
Yeah.
And they have all up from Canada clear down across here, you know,
Yeah.
that aquifer is just going dry. They just pull so much of it out. It hasn't resupplied. Now there's another thing that it's possible that they could do instead of piping the water down here. Maybe they could replenish that, but I don't know how they'd go about that. But it's not possible. You know, I think we've pretty well proven that science can do about anything. They put their heads to it.
Yeah.
So.
Are there other ways that the landscape has changed in Union County, like different plants or trees or animals or?
No, I don't. Like I say, the crop to change the crop in there, and then some of that. If they don't get water on it, a lot of that land will go back. Like in Sedan and Seneca, it'll go back to grass, and they'll grow and they'll grow some different crops. But there's not.
Were there
gotta have the
people
water.
doing sheep or lambs maybe before in this
Yeah,
county?
if they don't have water on it, the land will certainly decrease in value. There's no question about that.
Yep.
Because the water is what made it valuable. But of course, the grassland has increased a lot in value through the years. Like I say, my dad could have bought a lot of land for $2 an acre. It brings 300 to 400 an acre today.
Yep.
But
So any last lessons for the next generation of farmers or ranchers?
Or advice.
Advice?
Yeah.
Advice on getting
Getting
through?
into the business.
no, and he ought to be a poor one to give advice.
You have so much experience.
We have a lot of experience.
Well, I don't know. I think about the only thing advice I can is if you have to roll with the punch. Whatever shows up, you better study it and take advantage of it, because the worst mistake any of us can make is stand on the sideline and say that won't work, or that won't work, or this won't work, because maybe it will. So.
That is great advice.